This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Chapter 6 looks at aspects of technology and information. To make good decisions, to control, it is essential that the people involved have access to relevant data and information. But already we've used two terms there. We've used data and we've used information, and we just have to distinguish between them. Data is essentially raw fact. So I could collect the heights of everyone living in the city, and I could have a great big printout with all the heights on it. That could be absolutely accurate. That would be data, that's raw fact. Most data is not of itself terribly useful. It's only when it's processed in some way that it really becomes informative in most cases. So if I had the heights of everyone in the city and I were to work out the average height, that's maybe of some more interest to me. If I were to work out the average height of males versus females, that might be interesting. If I were to work out the heights of 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and the average heights of each of these categories and so on, that might be interesting as well. But just the very often data itself, there's too much of it, is too difficult for us to make sense of. Some sort of processing and presentation is required to make it informative. And a lot of data processing or IT is to turn this raw data into information which is informative and present it in a way in which we can absorb it. Now, a common way of thinking about what qualities good information would have is to use this mnemonic, which we've got here, of accurate. Now, different textbooks change very slightly what these letters stand for, but this is as good a list as any here. So you want the information to be accurate, but by accurate we don't necessarily mean right down to the last cent. If you are the head of a large international organization, you don't need to know the information, that sort of accuracy. You might be quite happy with the nearest $1 million. By and large, the greater the accuracy in which you want to record and present something, the more expensive and time-consuming it's going to be to do that. So sufficiently accurate not to be misleading. Similarly, it has to be complete. You don't want to lose half of the report, it tears off, you don't see the interesting stuff, you don't want to miss half of the branches which are reporting to you and so on. It has to be complete. Cost beneficial. Whether you're working for a profit-seeking organization or a not-for-profit organization, you are in charge of the resources of the organization, basically the money in the organization. And if you're going to be spending money, you have to make sure it's been spent in a beneficial way. Either you're going to be able to make more profit, or in a hospital you're going to be able to treat more people. There is no point in having information which costs that to produce, and which is only going to produce a benefit of that. You'd be better off without that information and spending that money somewhere else. User targeted. Make sure that you only supply information to people which is going to be useful to those people. You don't want information overload, because if there's too much information being thrown at you, what happens is that you miss the significant stuff. And you may have suffered the plague of emails, where some people send emails to everybody in the organization, and 9 times out of 10 it's nothing to do with you, but you have to read it and waste time only to discover it's nothing to do with you. Relevant to the person in the organization. How will it help you change what you do? How will it help you make your decision and so on? How will it help the organization fulfill its mission? Just because you can have information doesn't mean that information is relevant to anything. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean those measures are in some way going to be useful. Authoritative. The provenance or the source of the information should be stated, and then you can make your mind up whether it's going to be reliable or not. And again, you've probably come across information which turns out not to be unreliable. You maybe have Googled information on the internet, and of course all sorts of stuff comes in there. Some of it's proper information, some of it's advertising information, some of it's out-of-date information. Companies who've long gone out of business but their website still lingers and so on. If you are particularly using public sources of information, you need to make sure that you can place some reliance on it. Timely. Information needs to be supplied to you quickly enough to enable you to use it in your decision making. If it comes too late, it's a waste of time. But again, remember, very, very quick information tends to have a cost associated with it. Some information you need very quickly. If a customer rings up and says, do you have something in stock, you need to be able to kind of tell them within a few seconds usually. But if you're asked to some information about last week's wages, then you might be able to wait a day before you find that information, because next week's wages aren't going to be paid for a few days yet, and so on. And finally, it has to be easy to use. It has to be laid out and presented. It has to be labelled and annotated in a way that you know precisely what it is saying, and you can quickly assimilate what that information is getting at. You must realise that in organisations, different levels, or people at different levels in the organisation, require information of different types. So if we think of the organisation as dividing into these three main levels here, the top management and the board, these are the people making the long-range strategic decisions. They're in charge of the whole organisation. And generally what they want in their information is summaries. They don't want everything to the last dollar. They want a summary. They will be looking at historical information, but they'll also be looking forward. It's their job to look forward. It's also their job to look outside the information that's available internally, because you want to see what your competitors are doing. You maybe want to see what the economy in America is doing. You maybe want to see what the exchange rate with Australia is doing, and so on. So it tends to be forward-looking, tends therefore to have many estimates on it. It also tends to be what we call ad hoc. A lot of it is non-routine. So maybe the CEO has read an article over the weekend in a newspaper, something maybe about the economy in Brazil, comes in, wants to know, should we be thinking of Brazil as a market that we should be going into, suddenly calls for a report on the market there, and you may never have that again. So forward-looking, a lot of estimates, a lot of external information, a lot of kind of once-off ad hoc information, as well as the more mundane, routine monthly management accounts. If you go right to the bottom here, the operational staff. The operational staff are the people who are recording transactions as they happen, doing things. By and large, the information they want is going to be very, very accurate. If someone sends you an invoice, you have to record that precisely. If you're placing an order, you have to write precisely how many items you're ordering and what they're going to be costing. Usually this information is almost exclusively internal, and usually it's very routine. Caught in the middle somewhere, there's the middle management, the kind of supervisory roles. These are the managers who tend to focus on what's happening in the year, getting this year's budget and so on there. They have a bit of a mix going on. They are, of course, interested in historical information. What were the results for the 6 months just been? But they're also keeping an eye on what are the results for the 6 months coming up. Am I going to hit my profit budget going forward? They also need to be aware of certain external information, maybe about an advertising campaign or a special promotion that a competitor has put on, and they maybe need to respond to that. The ideal information system will be able to cater for these various levels of information and to tailor the information to what these people require. Now, what choices do we have available when setting up an IT system? And broadly, it's the configuration. It's whether we go for wired or Wi-Fi or 3G, whether it's local or cloud, and whether we go for centralized or decentralized. So the first thing we're going to look at is the configuration. When computers first began really, they were invariably what was called standalone computers. In other words, you had one computer sitting in a room and it wasn't attached to any other computers. And even when desktops were invented around the 1980s, they were standalone computers. Fine for very small businesses where only one person is operating them, only one person needs the information. Once a business expands even slightly, it's pretty useless because there's a requirement really to share information and for different people to do some processing on the system. And very quickly, some sort of networked system was invented. So most personal computer desktop systems are now networked on either local area networks or wide area networks. So a local area network means what it says. It's in a local area, like within a hospital, within a school, within a university campus, and they rely on a special cable being wired around that location, usually called an Ethernet cable, and these computers are just plugged into that. And immediately this allows information to be shared between the various users. It allows emails to be sent. Generally, one of the computers plugged in is what's called a file server, and a file server stores most of the information in the system in this one kind of centralized location, and all the users can dip into that information. And the great thing is everyone sees the same information. It is equally up to date for all of them. There is only one copy of the information, and if there's only one copy of the information, it only needs to be updated once. Once you get outside the local area network, a local area, it's not practical to lay your own cable from one city to another. You begin using what's called wide area networks, and this makes use of basically the commercial telephone system to transmit data over. So typically what you might have is two branches, one in the south of the country, one in the north. Each has its local area network, but then they are joined to make a wide area network by making use of the commercial telephone system to transmit data from one to the other. And it's not just within a country, you can do it internationally as well. You can have this wide area network. Should it be wired or Wi-Fi or 3G? Well, wired implies being able to put wires in there, and in many ways, if you're within one office, it makes sense to do that. The transmission is usually very quick and very reliable. However, it doesn't work so well if many of your staff are out maybe traveling around. So maybe from room to room, maybe they have laptop computers and they move from office to office or room to room. They want to be able to link up to the system. And there are many companies produce Wi-Fi or install Wi-Fi in their offices. And even more than that, if you have salespeople out at remote locations on the road picking up orders and so on, they can communicate through basically mobile phone technology using 3G or 4G technology. And this gives much greater flexibility on where you can use the system. Next, there is local or cloud. Now, what's meant by local or cloud? Well, if you have a local system, it means you have your personal computer sitting in front of you, and on it you have all your files and all your programs. If instead of local it was a cloud system, it means you have your personal computer in front of you, but really it's just acting as an interface, a window. And the real processing of the data is really held somewhere remotely, and you're interacting with that really through the internet or over Wi-Fi or some sort of technology like that. The cloud is becoming much more popular. A great move towards cloud technology, because if you have your computer and your stuff on it and your software on it. First of all, there's a lot of duplication on the software. Every computer needs its own copy of the software. And then if the software is upgraded, every computer, maybe thousands in an organization, have to be upgraded. There's a danger that the data is there on your machine but not available somewhere else. There's a danger that you're a bit careless about it and it's not properly safeguarded. And there's a considerable move towards having not only the data but the processing resources remotely. So if I was doing a word processing exercise using the cloud, I would see what would look like a word screen in my computer, but it would be just like an interface. It would just be like the front end of Word, if you like. I'd be typing on that, but really what I'm typing is going away and being stored maybe thousands of miles away, and it's there that the processing is actually being performed. When I store the data, it's not stored here, it's stored remotely. Now, what are the potential advantages of moving towards this cloud technology? Well, it's cheaper software. You have to license it for cloud usage. You license it according to the number of potential users, but it's cheaper than having a separate copy of the software on every machine you have. Secondly, let's say that you were processing something which requires a lot of processing power, maybe something to do with graphics and design and so on. Every designer on a conventional system would need a powerful computer to do all the rendering and the shading and the colouring of what they were designing. But for most of the time, they don't need that power. They're designing something, and then they say render, which makes it look real, if you like, photorealistic. And for a little while, maybe an hour a day, it needs intensive processing. And for the other 23 hours out of 24, the computer is really a bit over-specified. So what you can do is have very, very modest computers on your desktop, where maybe you could do the initial drawing, and the real processing and the rendering, the hard work, is done on the remote computer. And because everyone's sharing this remote computer, you get much more efficient use out of it. And you could afford very fast processing in one place, where maybe you couldn't afford it in 10 places. Easier and quicker to do software updates, because they only have to be done on a cloud machine, not the 100 different users using the cloud. Similarly, easier maintenance. Backups, for example. It's important to take backups to safeguard your data. But if you have 100 people, each with their own data, you're having to try to ensure that all 100 people are complying with the rules which say back it up daily. If it's all in one place, then the maintenance is only to be done in one place, and you can more easily enforce the rule and ensure that the backups are done properly. And of course you can afford to have a skilled, qualified, proper person looking after this very valuable repository of data and processing. And finally, because the software and data is held in the cloud, it doesn't really matter where you are, given the access codes and the passwords and so on, you can access it from anywhere. So you could start off doing something in the office, the information is stored in the cloud, you leave your computer in the office, but you go home, you have another computer there, you can log in from home and you can access that data again, or you can access it on the road or abroad, wherever you are. So much greater flexibility potentially on the processing. Disadvantages: it is completely reliant on good data communication. If the data links for some reason break down, you are a bit stuck because nothing can happen locally. And secondly, potentially another company, the cloud company, maybe somebody like Microsoft or Oracle or one of these large companies, they're the people with your data. And some people are maybe a little bit uneasy about some of the confidentiality aspects of parking and storing your really confidential data with someone else. Next, should the system be centralized or decentralized? It's a bit like the cloud, not quite the same. But if you have a centralized system, it means you've got in your office one large processing unit, one large computer, and you have 12 users who are making use of that, really through input-output terminals, a keyboard and a video monitor there. In a centralized, decentralized system, everyone has their own powerful computer, and the computing is done in a more distributed form. Advantages of one tend to be the disadvantages of another. So the advantages of a centralized system, again, a bit like the cloud, if it's centralized, all your programs, all your data is centralized, you can lock away that computer securely. You can make sure that there's a good virus checker on it. You can make sure that it's updated properly and backed up properly. Far easier than trying to get a dozen people maybe to do that. It tends to be cheaper. One big computer tends to be cheaper than 12 little ones of the same processing power. It permits sharing because all the data is in one place. And also there is less risk of people buying software to run for themselves on their computer which is incompatible with someone else's. Disadvantages of decentralized, a big disadvantage of centralized computing. Very much with centralized computing, not only does the shift come in where the computing power is, but it comes in where it's managed from. Who holds the budget tends to move from individuals to head office. And if I suddenly want another bit of software or another bit of special programming to be done, in a centralized system I tend to have to join the queue. Whereas if it's localized, decentralized, if I think it's worthwhile getting a new piece of software, well, I can see if I can authorize it in my budget and I can get that software much faster. And finally, more resilient to breakdown. In a centralized system, if that central computer breaks down, no one can really work. Whereas in a decentralized system, even if one of the computers breaks down, by and large, the other ones can continue pretty much as they were. You will be familiar with the web, the internet, maybe intranets, maybe extranets. The term internet, or the terms internet and web, are often used interchangeably, and for most of the time it doesn't matter very much which you use. Strictly speaking, maybe for the purpose of the exam, the internet is really the physical network, the physical connection of machines throughout the internet. The web and the World Wide Web is the way in which you communicate with web pages. So you use particular protocols to make sense of a web page when it's broken down. It uses what's called a markup language, so that the graphics and the colors and the sizes of the fonts and so on appear as you wish them to appear. There are other protocols as well as the World Wide Web ones. There are protocols for file transfers and so on as well. And all of these take place over the physical element of this, which is what is called the internet. Intranets are really internal internets. Whereas with an internet I can go and look at Ford's website, I can look at British Airways website, I can look at Volkswagen website or whatever I want to be doing. Internets tend to be outward, if you like, external. Intranets are kept within a company. So within the company intranet, I could typically see the employee handbook. I could maybe look up the ethical guide. People maybe send you emails over the intranet so that they never actually leave the company. You can have company newspapers and bulletins distributed over the intranet, all internally. Much better than delivering by paper. If you deliver stuff by paper, well, there's always somebody not quite sure which is the latest bit of paper I should be looking at. So all your handbooks and guides and procedurals manuals, they're all spot up to date because they're all held on the intranet. An extranet is where your intranet has got access to somebody else's intranet. So typically a supermarket, when ordering goods, will be able to access the intranet of a supplier, so that it can send in a way electronic messages to the supplier instead of sending a paper order and so on. So extranets really increase the flexibility of processing considerably by opening up, if you like, your really in a way opening up your system to more inputs and outputs from outside. Now, big data. Big data is I suppose a modern type of expression that you begin seeing a little bit more. Big data, what's the definition? Well, here we have one: extremely large collections of data that may be analysed to reveal patterns, trends and associations, especially relating to human behaviour interactions. And the people who really started big data were supermarkets. And supermarkets began this because, of course, supermarkets know what's being bought because they have the barcodes that are scanned. They know what's being bought in every outlet every second of the day. And then they said, well, if we give people loyalty cards, and I know people will come back because they get points that they can redeem later on. Actually, if they have a loyalty card, we can track what they are spending money on. And a typical big data collection in a supermarket will hold information about what every one of the loyalty card holders has bought maybe over the last 5 years. It builds up a fantastically detailed pattern of consumption. So it knows who buys the cat food. It knows kind of who's got a baby. It can work out, well, you had a baby 5 years ago. Now that baby's 4 or 5 years old, whatever it is. Now it's thinking of going to school. And maybe now we're in the market for selling school clothes to it, and so on. It works out patterns of consumption. We know that you are vegetarian. We know that your alcohol consumption is maybe a bit higher than it should be, and so on. And by building up these patterns, this knowledge about your consumers, you can make them special offers. You can predict perhaps what they will want to buy. And some of these are non-intuitive. Some of these are surprises. Sometimes you find little kind of gems or nuggets of information that you never expected. The story is told that when Walmart in the States, very big supermarket in the States, started this, they found an unexpected association between sales of baby food and the sales of beer. And they didn't expect this at all. And the story is that when they investigated it, they found that what was causing it was a new baby at home. Mother would stay at home recovering and with the new baby, would send dad down to the supermarket to buy baby food and nappies and so on. Maybe dad hadn't been a frequent visitor at the supermarket, and going around with his trolley, finds the baby food, finds the nappies, and then finds beer. And says, I'm a new dad, I deserve a reward, I'll put some beer in the trolley as well. And again, the story goes on to say that Walmart then experimented by putting baby food and beer next to each other to make it convenient for dads, and the sales of beer went up. But it's kind of seasonal variations, how maybe a weather forecast or weather is going to affect consumption, how maybe a football match coming up is going to affect consumption of certain foods and so on. And by gathering this huge variety of information on people, the hope is that you market to them better. When talking about the 3 V's, people talk about the volume of the data, the variety of the data, and the velocity of the data. We'll put them into this here. So there could be a fantastic variety of data which is collected. So in a supermarket, if you go with your mobile phone on, they can track you as you move around the supermarket. So not only do they know necessarily what you buy, but they know what counters, what products you've stopped at, what you've looked at, and so on. They can maybe even tell which ones you've picked up and kind of put back again, and so on. So we've already a mixture there of financial data, what you bought. They know how long you've spent in the supermarket. They will know maybe which areas of the supermarket you visited. And this can then sometimes be used to increase sales. Data arrives continually. So it tends to be a 24-hour operation. And it has to be processed kind of pretty quickly to pick up changing trends and to react quickly enough. Remember, one of the desirable attributes of information was it is received timely. There is no point finding out that last month people suddenly wanted strawberries and cream because Wimbledon was on, or because the sunny weather or something of that sort, because a month later the weather's gone cold again. And then volume, huge volumes of data, thousands of customers, thousands of visits to the supermarket over 5 years, and special techniques had to be really developed to handle this very high volume of data, which was also coming in a very different sort of variety. The 3 V's sometimes add a fourth one here called veracity. In other words, to what extent can we rely on it? Is it truthful? Are we picking up a real effect, or are we picking up simply some artifact that is not worth worrying about too much? Big data deals with two types of data. There is what's known as structured data. So in terms of your loyalty card, what you buy and when you buy it and how much you spent on each visit is structured data. We know what that data, what the shape of data is going to be looking at here. Unstructured data is where the data can be of all kind of shapes and sizes. So some supermarkets want to be able to maybe relate the sales patterns in a supermarket with the geographical area and the sort of maybe wealth of the area and the people in the area in which the customers are thought to come from. So it's going to be really quite challenging to record and tie up basically what is geographical data and what is financial data. So unstructured data requires some very specialist kind of programming techniques to make sense of it. Software for big data, I wouldn't worry too much about Apache Hadoop. That's one particularly well-known brand name for processing very large data sets where a lot of it is unstructured. But basically, when you have all your big data recorded, then you get set loose on it, turning that data into information. And the sort of processes which are done, first of all, there is data mining to identify patterns and establish relationships or associations. And that's this example I gave you of beer and baby food. There's a lot of rubbish in there, like there is in a gold mine, and you have to sort through that. But every so often you come up with this bit of gold that could be useful for the future. There is predictive analytics. So by recording somebody's consumer patterns, then you can maybe predict how susceptible they are to an email, how perceptible, how likely they are maybe to upgrade a flight. If you say, have your upgrade for $50 off or something like that, is this a sort of person who by their past behaviour has shown a willingness to do that? It's sometimes said that if you're looking for a cheap flight and you go there on Monday and you look up cheap flights, you say, not sure, I'll leave it. And you go back Tuesday and you look at the same flight and I'll go back again. They will predict that you will probably come back Wednesday, and they will predict that you're actually pretty interested in that flight, from London to Cyprus or whatever it's going to be. And because you've gone there 3 times, you're obviously showing an interest, you're pretty anxious to go, and the price won't go down, it'll go up. And some people would say that if you are going several days in sequence to look at a particular site, maybe you should use different computers, maybe you should make sure you're anonymous, make sure there are no cookies lingering there, which are recording your previous visits and interest. And then text analytics. Big business looking at what's in your emails, for example. Some of the large firms like Google may do that. They look for keywords and say, well, this person has mentioned Cyprus, let's say. Maybe he has mentioned the words holiday and Cyprus in an email to a friend, and they kind of put 2 and 2 together and say, oh, maybe this person is interested in a holiday in Cyprus. Maybe what we can float in now is some adverts to supply flights to Cyprus, holidays, and hotels in Cyprus, and so on. There. So we have text analytics. We can also have voice analytics, as above with audio. Computers are getting increasingly good at understanding what people are saying to them. And indeed, pieces of software like Siri, which is available on iPhones, and there's a device called the Amazon Echo, where you can ask it questions and it will come back pretty well with pretty good answers, as though you typed it into Wikipedia or something of that type. And then statistical analytics, looking at trends, correlation, changes in behaviours. This has been used, for example, by health authorities in some countries, certainly experimented with them, to identify outbreaks of influenza. So if you think you're getting the flu, what people do is you probably go to Google or something, you type in influenza symptoms, and then maybe you type in medicine for influenza. And if this is happening, a lot of these queries in one town happening, then that's pretty good evidence that maybe there's a bit of an outbreak of influenza beginning there. And this can be picked up faster than people actually going to their doctor. Because quite often what you do is, first of all, you try to cure yourself, and then when that doesn't work and you're still looking better, then maybe you go to your doctor. So for giving kind of advanced warning by this statistical analysis, some epidemics are certainly being tracked and traced, and some of them being foretold simply through queries on kind of Google about what people are interested in. Dangers of big data: it can be very expensive to set up the hardware. As I said, there are vast quantities of data that has to be held and then to be filtered and processed and so on. There's ever-present problem of regulation. These firms are holding information about you. Are you happy about it, that they know your consumer behaviour, and maybe then you begin to worry they're manipulating my consumer behaviour and so on. And many governments, particularly in Europe, have got very unsettled about the amount of information that companies and outside organisations are holding about their citizens. There is the loss and theft of data. Many examples of information going missing, of credit card information escaping, being hacked into and so on, and some damage being done. And then, of course, if incorrect data has been established, you could be hurt by it. If incorrect data is recorded about your credit history, whether or not you pay your rent, your mortgage, your loans and so on there, if it says you missed your loans, then it can be damaging and very difficult for you to get credit in the future. And we also have to be careful of things like what are called false positive results, where two things are correlated, but it's just accident. One doesn't cause the other. It's just two things which have increased at the same time, and unwarranted assumptions are made about those. And finally, employee monitoring. Employees more and more often, of course, are working at personal computers owned by their employees, owned by their employers. Employers can watch their rate of work, Employers, certainly in Europe now, have been given, just the other day, permission to look at emails sent by employees using work machines, using the work system. Because they say basically you are using an employer's device, and if you're using an employer's device, the employer has a right to see what you're using it for, and have a right to read your emails if sent through that employer's device. In other cases, if you're wearing a name badge, again, the company can monitor your movements around. If you're in a warehouse, it can look at how quickly you're moving, collecting goods, and so on. And there are some worries, shall we say, about the extent of monitoring, and maybe to what extent this is turning into a bit of a slave, really, in some situations. This gives rise to a wider ethical and social issues of privacy and security. And again, many governments have passed legislation to try to protect, particularly the use of private information, by which I mean information about individuals, about people. They're generally not as fussy about information about companies, but they're interested in preserving some safety for individuals whose information might be held. And in the UK Data Protection Act imposes obligations that you shouldn't hold data for longer than it's necessary. It allows information to be seen by the people it relates to. By and large, you can't see the information held on you by the police. You can't see information held on you by the security services, but you're allowed to see information held on you by credit reference agencies and so on. And you're allowed to ask for it to be corrected if you find out it is wrong. So here we have a list of the sort of potential dangers. Incorrect data leading to incorrect decisions about people. The theft of data, such as the theft of credit card information, even the theft of when you're going on holiday, so people know your house is going to be empty. Unauthorized alteration of information, so that maybe an individual goes in and changes their wages and salaries, or goes in and removes something that was said about them on their annual staff review. Fraudulent websites. So a website that looks for all the world, let's say like HSBC's website, and it'll ask you to type in your account numbers and your passwords and so on. And of course it then uses that information to siphon cash out of it. And these are very professionally done. Time wasting by employees. They think they only go on Facebook for a little while, but of course they end up being there quite a long time rather than working on the employer's business. Downloading or sending offensive or indeed illegal material. Violation of copyright. You buy one copy of a program and it's copied maybe throughout the office, or you maybe transfer copies of films or CDs, music tracks around the office as well. Denial of service attacks. A denial of service attacks is really a deliberate attempt to bring down a website by having lots and lots and lots and lots of machines normally trying to use it. And this is becoming of some political importance now. There is considerable evidence that some countries have tried to bring down the internet system in another country simply by bombarding the system, or bombarding one particular internet site with a lot of requests that simply makes that site fold up. Computer viruses, they can be just a nuisance, or they can be more serious. They can be viruses which alter your data, wipe your disk and so on. There can be physical dangers, fire, flood, earthquake, terrorism. Remember we talked about centralized systems. One of the advantages, all information is in one place, but there's a disadvantage there. If there's a fire in that one place, all of that data is gone. And it is absolutely important that if you are relying on information systems, that you have proper backups and ideally standby systems. So you've really nearly got two computers running in parallel. If this one goes out of action, then processing can be switched over to the other one seamlessly. Absolutely vital for businesses like banks and airlines. If an airline's website goes down for 2 hours, they will be losing fantastic amounts of revenue, as well as kind of undermining customer confidence in the airline. And of course, innocent harm can be done. People can innocently wipe files and corrupt files and destroy files and so on. And there has to be some sort of procedures and controls to try and prevent that. It's therefore essential that organizations ensure data is collected legally, that is input completely and accurately, that it is held safely and securely, including physical security, that can only be accessed by authorized people for authorized purposes, that it doesn't become like a free-for-all that anyone can see your medical records or anyone can see your bank records or your employment records and so on. You must ensure that software is properly tested. There have been a couple of situations in the UK where a bank was just doing a routine update to its ordinary software, and the new software had a flaw in it, and in one case the bank was out of action for nearly 2 weeks. Nobody could access their balances, nobody could get cash out of the automatic teller machine. It was a publicity disaster and of some expense to that bank. You have to take these regular backups, as I said. You must use virus checkers, you have to use firewalls to prevent hackers. Remember, if your machine is connected to the internet is connected to your machine. And there are a lot of nasty people out there who would like to see information on your machine or change information on your machine or get access to your passwords and account codes. You need suitable standby arrangements, as I said, disaster recovery plans. So should your system be severely damaged, you can switch very, very quickly to a standby system so that you're out of action for the minimum possible time. New working practices. IT has brought in the possibility of certain new working practices, and broadly these are as follows. Hot desking. Hot desking doesn't mean you don't have your own desk with your own drawers and your own cups of coffee in it and supplies of sugar in it and so on. Nobody has their own desk. People might have lockers where they can put some valuables and some personal items, but when you come in the morning you are assigned a desk and all calls will go through to there. You log on whatever machine is there and you can use the shared data from the centralized system. It's particularly useful where not everyone is in the office at the same time. If you have 100 employees but only normally 20 are there, it doesn't make sense to have 100 desks and 100 computers. Whatever 20 are in, they just get assigned to the desk. The other 80 are out with clients earning money. It allows the possibility of home working, at least for part of the time. So instead of commuting in, you sit at home, you link into the office computer and so on, and you can get your work done there. Generally speaking, companies expect employees to make an appearance every now and again because it's good for teamwork. It's good for the culture of the organization to actually meet the people you're working with. Teleconferencing. Instead of travelling through the country or abroad to have a conference, now with a camera and a monitor, you can have a lot of the time conferences done electronically, and it saves a lot of time and money from actually physically travelling. Voice over internet protocols, best one known as maybe Skype. You can phone abroad now with video for practically nothing. Many of the teleconferencing mechanisms make use of that. We talked earlier about virtual and boundaryless companies, where you've got a very small core organization, and what it does is communicate with suppliers, communicate with designers, communicate with perhaps the logistics companies, communicate with customers, and its role is really an organizational role. And all of this required really very good IT, very good communications to make the organisation feasible. You can have virtual teams by the same idea. You could have 6 people who never meet each other, who nevertheless can collaborate on production of documents, meetings and so on, and they can do this quite remotely. Marketing, I'll just say internet. Internet used extensively now for marketing. Product delivery, think of Netflix, think of MP3, music downloads and so on. We don't have to go out anymore and buy CDs or rent, video cassettes. We can get movies instantly over the web. Training on demand. Training on demand, maybe a bit like you're getting now. You don't have to wait till a particular course comes around. You say, I need to learn about pivot tables on Excel, and I know nothing about it. And you go and you get a little bit of instant training, just-in-time training it's sometimes called, just when you need it. And then there's customer relationship management, using technology to build an ongoing relationship with the customer, so that they're not just kind of passing by and buying once from you. What you want is a customer who keeps coming back, who would never almost consider moving to someone else because you look after them so well.